Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the warm-ups for the first half of the cycle, for the new cycle that we're actually on. Before I get started, please let me encourage you to open up to the warm-up packet template and to fill in the questions and the answers for the warm-ups to get full credit. Remember to copy them down in full, and remember that there's going to be another set posted next week for the warm-up packet cycle. Let's go ahead and get started, and we'll proceed from there. For Monday and Tuesday, what is decolonization and what specific events happened in Africa after all the years of colonization and European colonial rule? So while you copy down that question, let me explain why this matters. In this particular part of the course, we're talking about all the years of colonization kind of coming to a head here in the sense that many African nations began to advocate for their own independence. After World War II, many different types of European nations did in fact loosen their control of their colonial holdings, not just in Africa, but around the world. But what events led to that, and what events resulted from that? Simply put, decolonization is just the reverse policy of colonization. It's where African independence movements begin to form and really take off. So for this part of Africa's history, we begin to see a lot of different types of, I guess you could say, nation states and nations together advocating for their own freedom and liberty. So the movements themselves that appeared over time in Africa, after World War II specifically, involved many countries not only beginning to advocate for their independence, but also, of course, later getting it from Europe. And this would, of course, have positive and negative impacts and consequences. For example, in some countries you would find smooth transitions, and literally what happened in many instances is that some of these countries, of course, did get freedom, they wrote their own laws, and they elected officials who were, of course, of their country, and they ruled decently well. However, keep in mind, nothing goes over perfectly here, so finding their footing was tough to do, but in some instances, many African countries began to find it. In other countries, strife and war and turmoil was essentially their story. Some countries physically fought both European colonizers and fellow Africans for control, even after they won independence. Control is a really important thing, and so too is power. So I think that's what added to the essence of just civil discourse in some of these countries. And then in other countries you would find genocide, specifically in Rwanda and in Sudan with the region of Darfur. Some countries struggled with ethnic divisions that they could not be rehealed. And so this stems from both the colonial era and then also from the post-independence era as well. Some of these countries would dissolve in just total chaos. And in many ways, the effects of genocide and strife are still felt to this day. So the lasting legacy part of this, why do we have to talk about decolonization and independence in a world cultures class? Well, this is really the story of not just Africa, but the story of other places around the world. Some African countries are strong and secure today, but others, in fact, struggle from years of colonization and turmoil. So to kind of put this into perspective here, for anybody who looks at Africa and says, why are they so poor? Why do they appear to be backwards? It really comes as a result of all the years of mistreatment from both slavery as an institution and then also as to colonization as well. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. Let's go ahead to the next question of the day, which I do believe is the last question of the day for the entire unit. What are some key contemporary issues affecting Africa's internal development and strong stance in the world? So while you type this question, let me just kind of rephrase why this matters. Looking at Africa today, we can learn a lot about what Africa as a whole entire continent has been through and really what the future holds. So let's go ahead and try to articulate some of those things right now. So the effects of decolonization and independence movements are still very much so felt throughout Africa today. Certain countries are struggling with the lasting legacy of European colonial rule and inner conflict and inner strife. And just simply put, these problems are hard to overcome. Essentially, there's also the debate over natural resources. Problems with conflict minerals and the treatment of native populations. This has been one of the biggest problems, I think, for Africa specifically. Although Africa is home to many natural resources, keep in mind the whole problem that they're having here is how they get them to mass markets and how the native populations are essentially being treated by both their own country and also by outside sources as well. Poaching is another serious issue we're going to talk about in today's lesson. And of course, if you don't know what that is, that's essentially the legal activity of killing animals for goods. So, for example, the ivory tusks from, rhinoceros and other animals, and elephants specifically too, that's decimating animal populations, whole populations in Africa specifically. And this causes a rise in vice-filled industries and activities. We would be remiss as well if we didn't talk about Africa's institutions, which at best are sometimes tenuous depending on the country that we're talking about. Africa's institutions are not adequately supported and funded and set, so therefore, this inhibits their ability to solve serious problems like famine, disease, and inequality. Another key problem that I think Africa faces in many ways gets overlooked is the fact that their leaders that are still in power today are, in fact, somewhat corrupt. There are many unstable, dangerous leaders who both seek, assume, and keep political power in Africa for many years. And so, this, of course, has huge ramifications on the people and how the country develops and evolves. And here's the last thing in terms of Africa and the world today, the relationship with the world in many ways is interesting and sometimes a little bit heated and unstable. Africa's relationship with the UN specifically and foreign powers has been unsteady and unpredictable at best. I think a great example of that is looking at how the UN has acted as a peacekeeping force in genocide in Africa. In many ways, they didn't actually act or do anything to solve or curtail those problems. And foreign powers today, in many ways, are both helping but also hurting Africa too, for reasons that we'll discover more in this lesson. So there you guys have it. Those are the warm-ups for the questions of the day. I wish you all the best of luck in completing them, and you should earn full credit for that once the other set is posted accordingly. Thank you very much.